Imagine the vast, unforgiving expanse of the North Atlantic. Now imagine you're on a merchant ship, part of a lifeline carrying vital supplies, food, and troops. Below you, unseen, unheard, lurks a predator. A hunter forged of steel, packed with explosives, and crewed by men operating under unimaginable pressure. This hunter is the Unterseeboot, the U-boat, Germany's formidable submarine weapon that stalked the oceans in 2 world wars, bringing nations to the brink and forever changing the face of naval warfare. The very name conjures images of stealth, sudden destruction, and a desperate struggle for survival fought in the cold, dark depths. But what exactly were these machines, and how did they become one of the most feared instruments of war in the 20th century? The story doesn't begin with sophisticated attack computers or nuclear reactors. Like many game-changing weapons, the submarine had humble, almost experimental origins. Thinkers and engineers had dreamed of underwater vessels for centuries. But it was the late 19th and early 20th centuries that saw practical designs emerge. Germany, initially somewhat lagging behind Britain and France in submarine development, quickly recognized the potential of this new type of warship, particularly as a potential equalizer against the dominant British Royal Navy. The Kaiserliche Marine, the Imperial German Navy, embraced the U-boat concept with characteristic German engineering prowess. Early models were relatively crude by later standards, small, limited in range and diving depth, plagued by unreliable engines and temperamental torpedoes. Yet they possessed one overwhelming advantage: the ability to disappear beneath the waves, becoming virtually invisible to surface ships. When World War I erupted in 1914, the U-boat was still largely unproven in combat. Its initial role was seen primarily as coastal defense and reconnaissance. However, it rapidly became clear that these underwater craft could be devastatingly effective commerce raiders. Striking from concealment, U-boats began to sink Allied merchant ships, threatening the vital supply lines that sustained the war effort, particularly for Great Britain. The rules of naval warfare, traditionally requiring surfaced warships to warn merchant vessels before attack to allow crews to escape, seemed ill-suited to the submarine's stealthy nature. Surfacing to warn a potentially armed merchant ship, or Q-ship disguised as one, was suicidal for a fragile U-boat. This operational reality, combined with strategic desperation, led Germany to adopt policies of unrestricted submarine warfare at various points during the conflict. This meant U-boats were authorized to sink merchant ships, including those of neutral nations trading with the Allies, without warning. This policy reached its most infamous point in May 1915 with the sinking of the British passenger liner RMS Lusitania off the coast of Ireland by U-20. Nearly 1,200 people perished, including over 100 Americans. While Germany argued the Lusitania was carrying munitions, a point historians still debate regarding quantity and significance, the attack caused a global outcry, particularly in the United States, significantly souring relations with Germany. Although America wouldn't enter the war for another 2 years, the sinking became a powerful symbol of German brutality in Allied propaganda. Despite the diplomatic fallout, the strategic temptation of strangling Britain's maritime trade proved too strong. Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare in early 1917, a gamble intended to force Britain out of the war before the United States could effectively intervene. This move directly contributed to America's declaration of war in April 1917. While U-boats inflicted staggering losses, sinking millions of tons of shipping, the Allies eventually developed countermeasures. The convoy system, grouping merchant ships together under naval escort, proved remarkably effective, forcing U-boats to risk detection by surface warships and aircraft to make attacks. Depth charges, hydrophones for listening underwater, and increasingly capable patrol aircraft began to take their toll. By 1918, the U-boat menace of World War I had been contained, but its terrifying potential had been demonstrated to the world. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, aimed to permanently cripple Germany's military capabilities. Among its many clauses was a strict prohibition on Germany possessing or building submarines. For a time, it seemed the U-boat arm was finished. But military thinking, particularly within naval circles, rarely stands still. Driven by resentment over the treaty's terms and a desire to rebuild German power, clandestine efforts began. Secret design offices were set up abroad, technical knowledge was preserved, and theoretical work continued. A key figure emerged during this period: Karl Dönitz. A former U-boat commander from World War I, Dönitz rose through the ranks of the post-war Kriegsmarine, becoming a passionate advocate for submarine warfare. He meticulously studied the lessons of the first conflict, concluding that U-boats operating in coordinated groups could overwhelm convoy defenses and achieve decisive results. He envisioned Rudeltaktik, or pack tactics, where multiple U-boats would converge on a convoy spotted by one, launching coordinated nighttime surface attacks. This required extensive training, reliable communications, and commanders capable of independent action within a broader strategy. Dönitz instilled a fierce esprit de corps and rigorous training regimen within the slowly, often secretly, rebuilding U-boat arm. When Adolf Hitler came to power and openly repudiated the Treaty of Versailles in the mid-1930s, the path was clear for rapid expansion. The Kriegsmarine, Germany's new navy, prioritized U-boat construction, laying the foundations for the force that would contest the Battle of the Atlantic. When World War II broke out in September 1939, the U-boat force was smaller than Dönitz might have wished, but it was well-trained and equipped with capable boats, primarily the Type 7 medium-range and Type 9 long-range designs. The initial months of the war at sea were devastatingly successful for the U-boot Waffe. Operating often independently or in small groups, U-boats preyed on unescorted merchant ships and exploited weaknesses in early Allied anti-submarine defenses. This period, lasting roughly until early 1941, became grimly known to the U-boat crews as Die glückliche Zeit, the happy time. Sinkings rose dramatically. Commanders like Günther Prien achieved fame by penetrating the British naval base at Scapa Flow and sinking the battleship HMS Royal Oak, and Otto Kretschmer became the tonnage king for the sheer volume of shipping he sent to the bottom. Britain, heavily reliant on imports, found its very survival threatened as losses mounted faster than new ships could be built. The fall of France in 1940 gave the U-boats crucial new bases on the French Atlantic coast, drastically extending their operational range and allowing them easier access to the main shipping lanes. For Allied sailors, the Atlantic became a terrifying hunting ground where sudden death could erupt from the waves at any moment. The workhorse of the U-boat fleet during this critical period, and indeed throughout most of the war, was the Type 7. An evolution of earlier designs, particularly the World War I-era UB-3 class, the Type 7C was perhaps the most iconic variant. Displacing around 770 tons surfaced, it measured roughly 220 feet in length. Armed with 5 torpedo tubes, 4 bow, 1 stern, and carrying 14 torpedoes, plus a deck gun for surface action against smaller targets, it was a potent offensive weapon. Its range was considerable. Over 8,000 nautical miles surfaced at 10 knots, allowing patrols deep into the Atlantic. However, it was not a true submarine in the modern sense, but rather a submersible torpedo boat. It spent most of its time on the surface, using its diesel engines for propulsion and recharging batteries, diving only to attack or evade detection. Underwater, powered by electric motors, its speed and endurance were severely limited. The Type 9 was a larger, long-range boat, designed for operations further afield, off the coast of Africa, the Americas, and even into the Indian Ocean. Displacing over 1,100 tons surfaced, it carried more fuel and 22 torpedoes, boasting a range exceeding 13,000 nautical miles. While powerful, these larger boats were less agile than the Type 7s and presented a bigger target. Later in the war, Germany desperately sought technological game changers. The Type 21 Electroboot, arriving very late in 1944 and 1945, represented a quantum leap. Designed for sustained underwater operation with vastly increased battery capacity, higher underwater speed, and a streamlined hull, it was the ancestor of modern conventional submarines. Had it arrived earlier and in greater numbers, it could have posed a renewed, dire threat. But focusing solely on the machines ignores the human element, the grim reality of life aboard these iron coffins. Conditions were incredibly cramped. A typical Type 7C crew numbered between 44 and 60 men, living cheek by jowl for weeks or months on end in a narrow steel tube packed with machinery, weaponry, and provisions. Personal space was virtually non-existent. Bunks, often shared in shifts, hot bunking, were squeezed into any available corner. Sanitation was basic, washing facilities minimal. Fresh water was strictly rationed. The air quickly grew foul, thick with the stench of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, cooking smells such as they were, and the ubiquitous bilge water sloshing below the deck plates. Humidity was pervasive, condensation dripped constantly, clothing was perpetually damp, and mold grew readily. Add to this the constant, bone-jarring vibration and noise from the engines when surfaced, or the tense, near silence when submerged, listening for the dreaded ping of enemy sonar, or the terrifying rumble of depth charges. Food started as relatively decent rations, but deteriorated rapidly on long patrols, often reduced to canned goods and hard bread. Sleep deprivation was constant, nerves frayed by the relentless tension of hunting and being hunted. And looming over everything was the ever-present danger. A hull breach from a depth charge, collision, or mechanical failure could mean instant death by drowning in the crushing deep. Fire aboard was a catastrophe. Detection meant a desperate, potentially lethal game of cat and mouse with increasingly effective Allied hunters. The psychological toll was immense. Yet bound by discipline, camaraderie, and often fervent belief in their cause, these crews endured conditions that seem almost unimaginable today. The Wolfpack tactic, Donitz's brainchild, aimed to maximize the U-boat's effectiveness against the growing Allied convoy system. The theory was sound. A single U-boat on patrol, upon sighting a convoy, would shadow it while transmitting contact reports back to U-boat command, Befehlshaber U-Boote, or BDU, in France. BDU would then vector other U-boats in the vicinity towards the target. Once assembled, the pack, often numbering anywhere from 5 to over 20 boats, would launch coordinated attacks, typically at night and on the surface where their low profiles made them harder to spot. The aim was to overwhelm the convoy's escorts, usually destroyers, corvettes, and frigates, by attacking from multiple directions simultaneously, creating chaos and maximizing sinkings. In the early phases of the Battle of the Atlantic, particularly from mid-1940 to early 1943, Wolfpacks achieved considerable success. Convoys could be savaged over several nights, losing numerous ships. Famous convoy battles like those around HX-229 and SC-122 in March 1943 saw dozens of merchant vessels sunk in fierce fighting. However, the Wolfpack system wasn't foolproof. It relied heavily on reliable radio communication, which could be intercepted. Gathering scattered U-boats took time, allowing convoys to press on or reinforcements to arrive. Weather conditions often hampered operations, and as Allied countermeasures improved, assembling and coordinating a large pack attack became increasingly hazardous for the U-boats themselves. The Allies, facing potential strangulation, did not stand idle. The fight against the U-boat became a paramount priority, driving innovation in technology and tactics. The convoy system, initially resisted by some naval traditionalists and merchant captains, became mandatory and increasingly sophisticated. Escort groups were better trained and equipped. The development and deployment of ASTIC, sonar, allowed surface ships to detect submerged U-boats, though early versions had limitations in range, accuracy, and couldn't easily detect surfaced U-boats. Then came radar. Shipborne radar helped escorts locate surfaced U-boats at night or in poor visibility, stripping away their cloak of invisibility. Even more crucially, long-range patrol aircraft equipped with radar, like the B-24 Liberator, began to close the infamous Mid-Atlantic Gap, an area previously beyond the range of land-based air cover where U-boats had roamed relatively freely. These aircraft could spot U-boats on the surface, recharging batteries miles away, forcing them to dive where they were slow and vulnerable, or attacking them directly with depth charges and machine guns. High-frequency direction finding, known as HFDF or HFDUF, was another critical breakthrough. Installed on escort vessels, HFDUF could intercept and pinpoint the direction of the brief radio transmissions U-boats used for communication, including their vital convoy contact reports. This allowed escorts to hunt the hunters, vectoring ships and aircraft towards transmitting U-boats. And perhaps the most devastating weapon of all was intelligence. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park, through the monumental effort known as Ultra, eventually succeeded in decrypting German naval Enigma codes, including the complex codes used by the U-boat command. This provided invaluable, often real-time, information on U-boat positions, patrol lines, and intentions, allowing convoys to be rerouted around waiting wolf packs and enabling Allied hunter-killer groups to be directed to intercept U-boats. The combination of these factors, convoys, sonar, radar, air power, HFDF, and signals intelligence, gradually turned the tide. The climax of the Battle of the Atlantic arrived in the spring of 1943. Improved Allied tactics and technology, particularly the widespread use of effective radar by ships and aircraft, combined with the ability to read Enigma traffic, created a lethal environment for the U-boats. March 1943 saw massive convoy battles with heavy losses on both sides, representing the peak of Wolfpack success, but also foreshadowing the disaster to come. April saw U-boat losses begin to climb alarmingly. Then came May 1943, forever known in U-boat history as Black May. In that single month, the Allies sank 41 U-boats, an unsustainable rate of loss for the Kriegsmarine. The hunter had truly become the hunted. Improved escort tactics, including dedicated support groups reinforcing convoy defenses, saturation bombing by long-range aircraft, and the sheer weight of numbers proved overwhelming. Donitz, shaken by the catastrophic losses, was forced to temporarily withdraw most U-boats from the North Atlantic convoy routes. While the U-boat war was far from over, the strategic initiative had been decisively lost. Never again would the U-boats pose the same level of existential threat to Allied shipping. Despite the devastating setback of Black May, Germany did not give up the U-boat offensive. Instead, they focused on technological solutions to regain the advantage. One key development was the snorkel, a retractable air mast that allowed U-boats to run their diesel engines and recharge batteries while submerged at periscope depth. This drastically reduced their vulnerability to radar-equipped aircraft by allowing them to remain underwater for much longer periods. However, the snorkel mast itself could create a wake visible from the air, and it significantly reduced the U-boat's submerged speed while in use. Another innovation was the introduction of acoustic homing torpedoes, like the GNAT, German Naval Acoustic Torpedo, designed to home in on the propeller noise of escort vessels. While initially effective and causing considerable concern, the Allies quickly developed countermeasures, such as towed noise-making devices, codenamed Foxer. The most significant leap was the aforementioned Type 21 and the smaller coastal Type 23 electro boots. These represented a new generation of true submarines designed for high underwater performance. They featured streamlined hulls, massive battery capacity, hydraulic torpedo loading systems, and were significantly quieter than earlier types. The Type 21, in particular, was potentially revolutionary. However, due to bombing raids on production facilities, design flaws, and the sheer speed of the Allied advance across Europe after D-Day in 1944, only a handful became operational before the war's end. And they had minimal impact on the outcome. The final year of the U-boat war saw crews fighting with courage and desperation, often equipped with snorkels, but facing overwhelming Allied anti-submarine forces. Losses remained incredibly high. While strategy and technology defined the campaign, certain individuals inevitably stood out. Karl Donitz, mastermind of the Wolfpack and later commander-in-chief of the Kriegsmarine, and briefly Hitler's successor, remains a central and controversial figure. His strategic vision drove the U-boat war, but his unwavering commitment to it, even when losses became horrific, cost thousands of lives. On the operational side, commanders like Günther Prien, Otto Kretschmer, and Wolfgang Luth became celebrated aces, lauded by German propaganda for their daring and success. Prien's penetration of Scapa flow was a stunning feat of navigation and nerve. Kretschmer's meticulous attack methods earned him the highest tonnage scores. Luth was known for his aggressive tactics. However, the fame of these few often overshadowed the grim fate awaiting most U-boat crews. Prien was lost with his U-47 in March 1941. Kretschmer was captured the same month. Luth survived the war only to be accidentally shot by a German sentry shortly after the surrender. Their stories highlight the intense danger and attritional nature of the conflict. The legacy of the U-boat is complex and somber. Strategically, the Battle of the Atlantic was the longest continuous military campaign of World War II, and the U-boats came perilously close to severing Britain's lifeline and potentially altering the course of the war. They sank nearly 3,000 Allied merchant ships, totaling around 14 million gross register tons, along with numerous warships. But the cost was staggering. Of the approximately 1,150 U-boats commissioned by the Kriegsmarine during World War II, around 770 were lost in action. More devastating was the human toll. Out of roughly 40,000 men who served in the U-boat arm, nearly 30,000 did not return, representing a casualty rate of about 75%, among the highest for any branch of service in any nation during the war. These iron coffins truly lived up to their grim nickname for the vast majority of their crews. The technological struggle in the Atlantic also spurred massive advancements in anti-submarine warfare, sonar, radar, aircraft capabilities, and codebreaking. Techniques and technologies that would continue to evolve throughout the Cold War and beyond. The late war German designs like the Type 21 directly influenced the development of post-war submarines in the Soviet Union and the West, paving the way for the true submersible warships that patrol the oceans today. The U-boat remains a potent symbol of the strategic importance of sea lanes and the brutal realities of modern naval warfare. It was a weapon that exploited the vastness of the ocean and the vulnerability of surface ships, wielded with skill and determination. For a time, it seemed unstoppable, the silent hunter ruling the depths. But confronted by an equally determined foe, armed with burgeoning technology, superior resources, and crucial intelligence, the U-boat offensive ultimately faltered and collapsed under devastating losses. The Battle of the Atlantic was won not by a single weapon or tactic, but by a combination of relentless pressure, scientific ingenuity, and the courage of countless sailors and airmen facing a hidden enemy. So the U-boat story is one of technological terror, strategic gambles, incredible endurance under horrific conditions, and ultimately, overwhelming defeat. It reminds us that even the most fearsome weapons can be countered. What do you think was the single most decisive factor in defeating the U-boat menace? Was it the convoys, the code-breaking, the air power, or something else entirely? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you want to keep diving deep into these crucial, often overlooked chapters of military history, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more echoes from the battlefields and the waves to uncover together.